When the Galactic Empire killed 3 women generals, the Baba Yaga answered humanity's call. Part 1. The silence after the salute. The pen was still in her hand. That is the detail I cannot forget. General Adiz Akafar had just signed her name to the 3rd page of the Veth Prime Accord when the lights in the diplomatic hall flickered once, and she was gone. Not from a battle, not from a ship explosion or a brave last stand on some distant moon. She was gone in a room with marble floors and soft chandelier light, surrounded by delegates in formal robes, with a treaty on the table and ink still wet on the paper. I was standing 12 meters away. I was the junior escort officer. I was 29 years old, and I had never watched someone die before. The Kreth representative, a tall creature named Veth Sul, stepped back from the table and folded all 4 of his arms across his chest. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had just confirmed an appointment on his calendar. His translator unit buzzed softly, and then in perfect standard Galactic he said, "A tragic cardiac event. We extend our condolences to the human delegation." Cardiac event. General Adiz Akafar was 51 years old. She ran 12 kilometers every morning. She had survived the Cascade War, 2 border skirmishes near the Ren system, and a decompression accident on the station at Kova that had killed 4 others around her. She had a heart like a furnace. Nobody in the room said anything. Not the Galactic Senate observer. Not the 3 neutral system delegates seated along the curved wall. Not the 2 other members of our team. They all looked at their hands, or at the floor, or at the far window where the pale moons of Veth Prime sat low and cold in the sky. I looked at her. She had fallen sideways in her chair. The pen had rolled but was still loosely caught between her fingers, held there by the habit of a hand that had spent 30 years signing things that mattered. Her face was calm. She had not been afraid. Whatever had been done to her had been done too quickly for fear. I filed my report. The Unified Command received it. They thanked me for my service and told me the matter was under investigation by the Galactic Senate Office of Diplomatic Affairs. They told me to return to my post aboard the cruiser Harrow and await further orders. I did. 3 weeks later, General Yuki Tanaka was ambushed in the Ren corridor. She had been traveling with a small escort through what was supposed to be neutral space, a routine transfer between 2 human outposts. The sensor data from the surviving crew member, a young navigation officer named Owen Barr, showed that the ships which stopped them bore no flag, no registry code, and no markings of any kind. They came out of the sensor shadow of a mapped asteroid and opened fire without any communication at all. Tanaka's ship was not destroyed. It was disabled and then boarded. Owen Barr survived because he had crawled into the maintenance tunnel beneath the engine housing and stayed there for 11 hours, listening, not breathing too loud. He said the boarding crew spoke in Kreth military dialect. He had served near Kreth space for 4 years, and he knew what it sounded like. He said they took General Tanaka off the ship alive. She was never seen again. The Galactic Senate opened a second inquiry. The Kreth Empire denied any involvement and expressed deep sorrow for the instability of neutral space corridors, which they suggested the Senate really ought to do something about. The Senate issued a statement of concern. A statement of concern. I read it in the officers' mess on the Harrow, and then I set down my coffee and sat very still for a long time. Our 3rd general, Fatima al-Rashid, lasted another 2 weeks. She was the one who had most openly argued before the Senate for a formal investigation into both incidents. She had presented data. She had shown route maps and sensor logs and a careful, reasoned analysis of Kreth patrol movements in the months leading up to both events. She had stood before a chamber of 400 delegates from 31 civilizations and told them clearly and without drama that humanity was being targeted. The chamber had applauded politely and then moved on to a debate about trade tariffs in the outer belt systems. Al-Rashid's ship, the long-range explorer Ardent, was reported lost in a debris field near the edge of the Solon system 2 weeks after her Senate address. The debris field was not on any current chart. No rescue team reached the area for 6 days. When they arrived, the Ardent was intact but cold, no crew, no logs, and no black box. Just an empty, drifting hull sitting in silence like a question nobody wanted to answer. I was called back to the Unified Command Headquarters on Reach Station within 24 hours of that news. I had expected a briefing. I had expected orders, maybe a deployment, maybe assignment to some new protective detail. What I got instead was a room with 8 senior officers seated around a long table, all of them looking the way people look when they have already had an argument and nobody won. Admiral Lena Greer sat at the head of the table. She was a woman of 60 with gray at her temples and a face that usually looked like it had been made from patience. That day it looked like it had been made from something older and harder. She gestured to the seat across from her without saying anything. I said, "Colonel Voss," she said, "you were in the room at Veth Prime." "Yes, Admiral." "And you believe what your report says?" It was not a question, but I answered it anyway, every word of it. She looked at the other officers and something passed between them, a kind of silent agreement that had already been reached before I walked through the door. Then she folded her hands on the table and said, "We are out of options. Every conventional path is gone. The Senate will not act. Our fleet admirals are excellent in a direct engagement, but this is not a direct engagement. This is something else entirely. This is something that requires a different kind of mind." She paused. "There is a name," said the officer to her left, a quiet man called Commodore Alan Fitch. He said it the way you might mention something you were not entirely sure you believed in. A name that comes up when situations like this have no good answer. We have been arguing about it for 2 hours. "Say it," I said. He said it. The name was Ira Solveig. It landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Admiral Greer said, "She retired after the Cascade War. She made it clear she was done. She has refused every recall, every request, every letter we have sent in 11 years. "So we send a person," said Fitch, "not a letter." Greer looked at me across the table. "You were in the room at Veth Prime. You saw what was done and how it was done and how the room behaved afterward. I need someone who is not afraid of uncomfortable truths to go and find her. Someone who will look her in the eye and say what is actually happening without softening it." I understood what she was asking. "Where is she?" I said. "A place called Kale's Drift," said Greer. "On the outer edge of charted space. A frontier refueling station. 1,700 people, mostly miners and haulers. She has been there for 4 years. I stood up. I did not ask for time to think it over. There was no time for thinking it over. 3 generals were gone. The galaxy had looked the other way. And somewhere on the freezing edge of nowhere, the one person who might be able to answer for all of it was fixing ships and drinking bad coffee. "I will leave tonight," I said. Admiral Greer nodded once. She looked tired and something else, something that might have been hope, though it was too careful and too small to be sure about. I left the room and began packing. Part 2, What Walks in the Dark Between Stars. I had read the classified file on Ira Solveig 6 times before my shuttle touched down on Kale's Drift. It did not help. No file can really prepare you for the thing it describes. The words on those pages were accurate enough. Decorated veteran, strategic architect of the Cascade War's final phase, cited for 17 field innovations that had since been incorporated into Unified Command doctrine, retired with full honors at the age of 54. The file said she had refused all post-retirement consultancy offers. It said she had no current communication address on record. It said her last confirmed location was a settlement called Kale's Drift, a station built into the rock face of a cold moon, orbiting a dim and unremarkable gas giant at the far boundary of human-mapped space. What the file could not tell me was what 11 years of chosen silence looks like on a person's face. What it could not tell me was what it feels like to knock on the workshop door of a woman who once held 40,000 civilians alive through an 11-month siege, using nothing but borrowed time, and a mind that worked in ways no academy had ever managed to teach. Kale's drift was cold in a way that got into your bones the moment you stepped off the shuttle. The dock was functional and ugly, all bare metal and recycled lighting, and the smell of engine oil and old coffee. The people who moved through it were the kind of people who had chosen distance from everything, miners and haulers and the occasional gray market trader who did not make eye contact with strangers. I asked at the dock office for Ira Solveig. The woman behind the desk looked at me with mild suspicion, the way frontier people look at anyone wearing a clean uniform. Then she pointed toward the far end of the lower level. "Workshop 4, she said. "She's in there most days. Knock loud." I knocked loud. "Come in or don't," said a voice on the other side. It was a woman's voice, calm and dry, not unfriendly but not particularly warm either, the voice of someone who had long ago stopped worrying about how she sounded. I went in. The workshop was large and organized in a way that was not immediately obvious. To a casual eye, it might have looked like controlled disorder, but the longer I stood there, the more I could see that everything had a place and a reason. Tools hung in precise groupings. Parts were labeled in small, neat handwriting. A half-disassembled cargo freighter engine occupied the center of the space on a heavy work platform, and crouched beside it, with grease on her forearms and a hand tool I did not recognize in her right hand, was Ira Solveig. She was 65 years old. Her hair was white and cut short and practical. She was not a large woman, but there was a quality to the way she held herself, a kind of complete stillness in the body, even when she was working, that made you aware of her in a room the way you were aware of a lit lamp in a dark corridor. Not loud, just present, undeniably present. She did not look up when I came in. "You are either lost," she said, turning a fitting on the engine housing, "or you are from the Unified Command. You are too clean to be lost." "Colonel Maravas," I said, "I am from the Unified Command." "I know who you are." She set down the hand tool on a clean cloth and turned to look at me for the first time. Her eyes were gray and direct and carried the particular quality that belongs to people who have seen a great deal of chaos and are no longer surprised by it. "You were at Veth Prime. You filed the report on Akafar. It was a good report, clear, specific, no padding." I had not expected her to know that. "You read it." "I read everything that comes out of the Senate press releases and the command incident logs. I am retired, not blind." She wiped her hands on the cloth and stood. She moved with the ease of someone whose body had been very well used and was still cooperating. "There is coffee. It is not good coffee. Sit." There were 2 stools near a workbench. I sat on one. She poured 2 cups from a battered kettle and handed one to me and sat on the other stool and looked at me steadily while she drank. "Tanaka," she said, "and then Al-Rashid." "Yes." Al-Rashid's black box was not on the ship when the recovery team arrived. "No." She looked at the engine for a moment as if it had said something interesting. Then she looked back at me. "They took the black box because of what she saw. Not what she said in the Senate. Anyone can access those records. What she saw. Al-Rashid was in the Solon system, which means she passed through the outer edge of the Veth corridor on her way back from her last Senate session. She saw something she was not supposed to see. That is why she was third. The first 2 were about capability. Remove the diplomat and remove the strategist. The third was about information control. I stared at her. She noticed and almost smiled. "The file is in the public incident logs if you know what to look at. It took me 4 minutes. The Unified Command has been sitting with this for." "The Unified Command is sitting with a great many things," she said, without impatience, just as a statement of fact. "That is why you are here. They have run out of conventional answers." I set down the coffee cup, which was every bit as bad as she had warned. I am here because 3 generals are gone, and the galaxy is not going to help us, and we do not know what Al-Rashid saw or what the Kreth are planning next. I am here because Admiral Greer said your name and nobody argued with her. Lena Greer is a good admiral, said Ira. She knows her limits. That is rarer than it should be. Will you come? I asked. She did not answer immediately. She lifted her coffee cup and held it in both hands and looked past me at something, not the engine, not the wall, but something further away that only she could see. The workshop was very quiet. Somewhere in the walls of the station, pipes were working and the distant machinery of a frontier settlement was doing its slow business, but in that room it felt like we were the only 2 people on the moon. Which of them died last? She said. Al-Rashid. Her ship was found cold 6 days after she went silent. Ira was quiet for another moment. Then she set down her cup with great care, as if placing it down too hard might break something fragile nearby. Her face did not change. That was the thing about her. She did not perform grief. She just held it, and you could see the weight of it in the set of her jaw and the way her hands went very still on the workbench. She was the best of them, Ira said quietly. Tanaka had the sharper tactical mind, but Al-Rashid understood people. She understood what moved a room, what moved a civilization. The Kreth understood that too, eventually. Too late to stop her from building what she was building, but early enough to stop her from finishing it. I waited. What was she building? I said. I do not know yet, said Ira, but I will. She stood and looked around the workshop once slowly, as if memorizing it or perhaps saying something to it that she did not say out loud. Then she looked at me. I have conditions. I was told to agree to reasonable conditions. They are reasonable, she said. I answer to no committee, no council, no Senate working group, no Joint Command Review Board, no diplomatic oversight panel. I do not write progress reports. I do not give briefings to people who will ask unhelpful questions. I will work with the people I choose to work with, and I will not explain every decision while I am making it. Agreed, I said before she had finished speaking. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Lena Greer gave you wide authority. She gave me the authority to say yes to whatever it took to bring you aboard. Ira nodded once. Then go and have your shuttle ready in 2 hours. I need to finish this fitting, or Owen Barr's friend who owns this engine will have a miserable journey to the cassette run. I stood. I was almost to the door when she spoke again. Was? I turned. You were in the room when Akafar died. She looked at me steadily, and you did not look away. No, I said. Good, she said. You will need that. She turned back to the engine. I went to prepare the shuttle, and as I walked through the cold corridors of Kale's Drift, I realized that my hands had stopped trembling for the first time since Veth Prime. I did not understand why until much later, when I finally understood what it meant to be in the presence of someone who was not afraid of the problem. She had not started the journey yet. She was still in her workshop, fixing an engine for a stranger, as calm as a person can be. And somehow that was the most reassuring thing I had seen in months. Part 3: The Audit of Bones. Within 72 hours of Ira Solveig stepping aboard the Remembrance, I understood why the Kreth had moved when they did. They had waited until all 3 generals were gone. Not because the generals had been dangerous in the obvious way, not because they could call fleets or launch strikes or stand on a bridge and command a battle. They had been dangerous because they had been watching. And now Ira was watching, and the difference between her and every other senior officer on this ship was simple. She already knew where to look. She did not take a flag office. She did not hold a reception or introduce herself to the senior staff over dinner. She asked for a working space near the data archives and 2 research assistants who were, in her words, capable of sitting quietly and reading without needing to comment on everything. She got Ensign Ruth Perry, who was 23 and had the gift of absolute focus, and Lieutenant Nathan Cole, who was methodical the way a machine is methodical, without ego or impatience. The three of them disappeared into the archive room for 16 hours. I brought her coffee at hour 9. She was seated at a wide table covered in display screens, each showing a different file, patrol routes, Senate session transcripts, trade manifest records from the Veth corridor, communications logs from the three generals' offices going back 4 years. She had a plain notebook open beside her keyboard, and she was writing in it by hand, which nobody did anymore, in small, precise handwriting that covered the page with no wasted space. She did not look up when I set the coffee down. "The Kreth are not interested in our planets," she said. I pulled over a chair. "What are they interested in?" "Position." She tapped one of the screens, which showed a star map of the eastern spiral arm. "Look at where our three primary systems sit: Reach, Veth, and Solin. They form a triangle at the junction of 7 major hyperspace lanes. Every significant trade route between the inner empire and the outer neutral systems passes through or near at least one of those 3 points." I looked at the map. We have always known those were strategically valuable locations. Not strategically, structurally. She turned in her chair to face me fully, and I saw that she had not slept. Her eyes were bright in the way that some people's eyes get when they are very deep inside a problem. "There is a difference. Strategic value means the locations help you win a war. Structural value means the locations are the reason everything around them functions at all. If you want to take strategic positions, you attack. If you want to take structural positions, you do not need to attack at all. You simply make everyone who depends on them economically unable to function without your permission." She stood and moved to the largest screen, which showed a map of hyperspace lane configurations across the last 6 years. She pointed to a series of routes near the outer neutral systems. "Of lanes in this region have degraded in the past 3 years," she said. "Not all at once, slowly. One becomes unreliable, so traffic redirects to another. That one becomes congested, then unstable. Small civilizations that relied on the outer routes for trade begin routing through the central corridors instead. The central corridors are controlled by systems that have signed economic partnership agreements with the Kreth Empire." She paused. "Nobody announced this. Nobody made a declaration. It simply happened, the way water flows to the lowest point. And the 3 systems that still sit outside Kreth influence, the 3 systems through which free trade can still pass without Kreth oversight, are ours." The room felt very still. "They are collapsing the lanes deliberately," I said. "Yes, the degradation signature is not natural. Al-Rashid identified it. That is what she was presenting to the Senate, not just a theory about the generals, but the mechanism itself. The Kreth have a construction asset, something mobile, that moves through outer corridor space and introduces controlled damage into lane infrastructure. Not enough to close a lane immediately. Enough to make it gradually less reliable until traffic naturally abandons it." "The Ardent," I said. "She was in the Solin corridor when she went dark." Ira nodded. She saw the construction asset, or found evidence of it, and she recorded it on the Ardent's black box. "Which the Kreth removed." "Which they removed," Ira agreed. "And which means the recording still exists. They would not destroy it. The Kreth are thorough record keepers by culture. They took it because it contained evidence of their method, and they did not want that evidence in circulation. But it is somewhere, and I intend to find it." She turned back to the screens and picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway without appearing to notice. Nathan Cole appeared in the doorway. He was holding a printed data sheet, and his expression was the particular expression of someone who has found something they were not sure how to feel about. "Commander," he said, addressing Ira, "I found something in the cross-reference communications. The 3 generals were sending encrypted messages to a shared data repository on a ghost-flagged server in the neutral buffer zone. The repository is still active. It was never closed because nobody outside the 3 of them knew it existed." Ira set down the coffee cup, very carefully. The way she had set down her workshop cup on Kale's drift when I told her Al-Rashid had been last. "Can you access it?" she said. "It has a multi-key authentication," said Cole. "I would need authorization codes from at least 2 of the 3 account holders." "Work backward from their documented communication patterns," said Ira. "Find what channels they used for personal traffic and look for embedded key fragments. Al-Rashid was meticulous. She would not have left that repository without a recovery path." Cole nodded and disappeared. I looked at Ira. They were building something together. "They were building a distributed strike network," she said. "I suspected it when I saw the cross-referencing pattern in their communications. 3 minds, 3 different specialties, Akafar's diplomatic contacts, Tanaka's tactical models, Al-Rashid's intelligence analysis. They were creating something deniable and independent of the unified command structure. Not because they were acting outside their authority, but because they understood that the moment this became official policy, the Kreth would see it coming. And the Kreth saw it anyway. They saw the people, they did not see the work. She looked at the ghost server notation on Cole's data sheet. The work is still there, waiting. It took Cole 11 more hours. He found the recovery keys embedded in a series of routine administrative messages Al-Rashid had sent to a Senate archive system, hidden in the metadata of timestamp corrections. A method so mundane and so unremarkable that no surveillance algorithm would ever flag it. When the repository opened, it held 4 years of careful, interlocking construction. Akafar had mapped every diplomatic relationship the Kreth had built across 20 neutral systems, identifying which ones were genuine and which were leverage. Tanaka had modeled 9 separate operational scenarios for a campaign that worked not through direct engagement but through exposure and disruption, finding the Kreth's most sensitive hidden structures and making them visible. Al-Rashid had done the intelligence architecture, building a network of passive sensors and trusted contacts across the eastern arm that could feed real-time information to any operator who knew how to read it. Together, it was not a war plan. It was something more precise than a war plan. It was a scalpel. Ira read through the entire repository in 6 hours. Ruth Perry sat beside her and turned screens when asked and said nothing. I sat at the back of the room and watched Ira read, and the thing I noticed was that she was not surprised by what she found. She was measuring it, estimating it, and slowly something shifted in her expression. Not excitement, nothing so bright as that, but a deep and focused recognition. The look of a craftsperson who has picked up a tool made by a master and understood immediately what it was designed to do. When she finished, she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then said, quietly and to no one in particular, "They were so close." She was silent for another moment. Then she said, "Convene the senior staff at 1900 hours." The briefing room held 12 people. She stood at the front without a display behind her and spoke for 40 minutes. She explained the lane collapse operation, the construction asset, the repository, the network Al-Rashid had built. She explained what the 3 generals had been creating and how far it had progressed and what it would take to complete it. She laid out a campaign, not a military campaign in the traditional sense, but something far more precise. A series of actions designed to strip the Kreth's hidden operations of their invisibility, to expose what had been done in secret, and to make the Empire's behavior impossible for the galactic community to ignore or explain away. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Captain Yusuf Mendes, who had commanded the Remembrance for 8 years and had the face and manner of someone who had seen enough to be cautious about most things, leaned forward in his chair. "They will call it unauthorized action. They will call it a provocation." Ira looked at him with complete steadiness. "They will call it whatever allows them to sleep. We will call it finishing what 3 good people started." She looked around the table. "I need every person in this room to understand something. We are not doing this to start a conflict. We are doing this to make one unnecessary. The Kreth are confident because they believe their methods are invisible. Our task is simply to make them visible. The galaxy has been looking away. We are going to make that impossible." Another silence. Then Mendes nodded once slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Your ship," she said, "and your trust in that order." He gave her both. Part 4: The Baba Yaga moves. The first strike happened on a Thursday. Ira had chosen the day deliberately. Thursday was, by Galactic standard reckoning, the administrative changeover day for Kreth military logistics, the point in the weekly cycle when resupply orders were processed and personnel rotations were logged, and the attention of supervisory systems was at its most distributed. She had learned this from a patrol schedule embedded in Tanaka's tactical models. Tanaka had been thorough. The target was a covert resupply depot at the edge of the Veth system, registry number 7 Nullelka in Kreth military records, which did not officially exist. It was built into the inner surface of a hollow asteroid that orbited a cold secondary star at the outer edge of Veth space, and it had been supplying Kreth covert operations in the neutral corridor for 6 years. Al-Rashid's sensor network had identified it. Tanaka had calculated its supply schedule. Akafar had confirmed through a diplomatic contact, a quiet, careful person named Ambassador Dara Lund, who had spent 12 years attending receptions in Kreth space and listening to things said at the edges of conversations, that the depot had been used to stage at least 2 of the covert actions in human space. "We did not send a warship." Ira had found, in the long-term storage manifest of Reach Station's impound yard, a Kreth-registered hauler that had been seized 7 years earlier by a human customs team for carrying undeclared cargo. It had been sitting in impound ever since, in limbo because nobody had quite decided what to do with it. It was fully functional, bore a valid Kreth registry code, and would read on any Kreth sensor net as a routine resupply vessel. She had it quietly prepared and loaded and sent through the Veth corridor on autopilot, running its Kreth transponder, following the supply route that Tanaka had mapped. It arrived at the depot on schedule, docked as any resupply vessel would, and then experienced what the incident report would later describe as a catastrophic fuel cell failure. The depot was gone in 11 minutes. No human ships were anywhere near the Veth system when it happened. There was no sensor trace, no communication intercept, no evidence of any kind that pointed toward us. The Kreth had a facility that did not officially exist destroyed by what appeared to be one of their own vessels malfunctioning. They could not report it. They could not investigate it publicly. They could not even formally acknowledge it had occurred, because the moment they did, they would have to explain what the facility had been doing there. I heard about it from Ira at breakfast the next morning. She told me the way someone tells you the weather forecast. Then she poured herself coffee and went back to the archive room. The second strike came 8 days later, and it was not a physical operation at all. Among the things Al-Rashid had collected in the repository were communications encrypted, but not beyond the capability of the network she had built, between 3 Galactic Senate delegates and Kreth intelligence contacts. The communications were careful, as such things always are, but they were also specific. The delegates had received substantial economic benefits through intermediary organizations in exchange for steering Senate discussions away from certain topics. The investigations that had been quietly redirected, the motions that had been procedurally delayed, the times when a Senate vote on Kreth behavior in the neutral corridor had somehow always found reasons to be rescheduled. Ira had the communications authenticated through 2 independent neutral system intelligence contacts from Akafar's network. She had them cross-referenced with financial records that Akafar had assembled as part of her diplomatic intelligence work. The case was watertight. She did not take it to the Senate. She released it to every independent news network in the known galaxy simultaneously, through a distributed relay system that made the origin of the release impossible to trace. The package included a full index, authentication certificates, and a plain-language explanatory document that required no specialist knowledge to understand. The Senate erupted within hours. All 3 delegates resigned within 36 hours of the release. A fourth, who had not been in the documents but who had apparently decided that proximity was sufficient reason for concern, resigned quietly a day later for what his office called personal reasons. The Kreth demanded to know who had accessed the communications. Every intelligence service in the galaxy began asking the same question. Ira sat in the archive room and read their increasingly frustrated statements with the attentiveness of someone monitoring an interesting weather system. "They are looking in the wrong direction," she told me. "They are looking for a hacker. There was no hacking. Al-Rashid's network collected those communications through passive observation over 4 years. The senators wrote them on channels they believed were secure. The channels were not secure. They simply did not know that." And the Kreth? "The Kreth are angry," she said, "because anger is what they know how to do. Anger is not a strategy." The third operation was the one nobody talked about for a long time afterward, because Ira refused to explain it, and I eventually stopped asking. The Kreth construction asset, the mobile facility that had been collapsing the outer hyperspace lanes for 3 years, disappeared. Not destroyed, not captured as far as any subsequent investigation could determine. It simply ceased to be at the location where Al-Rashid's sensor network had tracked it, and it did not appear at any other location. The Kreth launched 3 search operations in the following weeks. They found nothing. The asset had been the cornerstone of a decade-long strategic plan, and it was gone, and they could not explain where it had gone without explaining what it had been doing, which they could also not do. I asked Ira about it twice. The first time she said, "It is dealt with." The second time she almost smiled, which was, I had come to understand, about as expressive as she got on matters she considered settled. What she had done required 12 days of preparation and involved contacts from Akafar's diplomatic network in 3 neutral systems, and a navigational calculation that Nathan Cole described to me, wide-eyed, as something no academy instructor had ever suggested was possible. Beyond that, I cannot tell you. She never wrote it down. On day 31 of what Ira privately called the audit, she never used the word campaign, never used the word operation. The Kreth sent a fleet of 7 vessels to a human colony on the outer edge of the Kesset system. They called it a security patrol. They positioned the ships at the colony's orbital approach and broadcast a message to the colony administration, informing them that the vessels were there to ensure stability in the region. There were 11,000 people on that colony. I was on the bridge of the Remembrance when we received the report, and I felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. 7 Kreth warships at a colony of 11,000 civilians was not a security patrol. It was a message. It was the Empire saying, "We know what you are doing. We know where you live. We can reach you." I went to find Ira. She was not in the archive room. She was in her cabin, and when I came in she was standing at the small viewport looking at the stars, and she looked for just a moment, just briefly, like someone who was carrying something very heavy. Then she heard me come in and the look was gone and she was herself again, still and focused and already thinking. "I know," she said before I spoke. 11,000 people, I said. "I know." She turned from the viewport. "How long ago was the fleet positioning report filed?" 40 minutes. She sat down at her desk and pulled up the Kesset colony administrative records. She looked at them for 2 minutes. Then she pulled up the Al-Rashid sensor network map and identified the nearest passive relay in the Kesset region. Then she pulled up a contact file from Akafar's diplomatic records, a name I did not recognize. A freight coordinator named Philip Edner, who operated a small logistics company in the Kesset belt system. She sent 2 messages. They were brief. "What did you do?" I asked. "Philip Edner's ships will have the colony population aboard within 30 hours, she said. "Routine freight coordination. The colony will appear fully occupied on the Kreth sensors until the last vessel clears the system. Al-Rashid's relay can manage that. And by then, a detailed account of the Kreth fleet's positioning, their communications during the approach, and their official registry identifiers will have been transmitted to every neutral system government in the sector. She looked at me steadily. The Kreth fleet is going to be standing in front of an empty colony, she said, while the galaxy watches. They cannot explain their presence without explaining their intent. They cannot leave without appearing to retreat. Whatever they do next, they do it in front of an audience that is now paying very close attention. I sat down. My legs had decided this was necessary. You planned for this, I said. You knew they would respond like this. I knew they would respond to feeling out of control, she said. That is what the Kreth do. They are very good at the long, quiet operation, but they are not accustomed to being the ones who do not understand what is happening. I have been making them not understand what is happening for 31 days. Eventually, something like this was inevitable. She stood and straightened her jacket. They will make contact soon, she said. Not through the Senate, not through any official channel, directly. They will want to speak with whoever is responsible. And what will we tell them? We will tell them yes, she said, and I will go. She opened her cabinet and began choosing what to wear for a meeting with the leadership of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. And she did it with the focused calm of someone choosing tools for a job they have done before, even though she had never done anything like this before in her life. She picked up the jacket, and then paused, and opened her small personal kit, and removed 3 items, 3 small pins, the kind that go on a collar. I recognized them because I had made it my business to know them. Akafer's diplomatic service pin, Tanaka's regimental badge from the Cascade War, and Al-Rashid's Senate access pin, standard issue, dull silver, smaller than a fingernail. She attached all 3 to her collar. Then she looked at herself in the small mirror above the cabinet for exactly 1 second and then turned away. Ready, she said. She was not asking me. Part 5. What the Baba Yaga leaves behind. The meeting lasted 4 hours. I was not in the room. Nobody was, except Ira Solveig and the Kreth High Executor, whose name was Vethkor, a senior official who had served the Empire for 40 years and who had, by all accounts, never in those 40 years agreed to meet with a representative of any civilization that was not already larger and more powerful than the one he served. He had asked for the meeting himself. I know what Ira told me afterward. I know what the Kreth Empire's subsequent behavior told the rest of the galaxy in the months that followed. Between those 2 things, a reasonable picture assembles itself. She walked into the room they had prepared on a neutral station in the buffer zone between human and Kreth space. It was a carefully designed room, neutral colors, no flags, no emblems, a table that was deliberately neither one side's design nor the other's. Vethkor had brought 2 advisors. Ira had brought nobody. She sat down across from him, and he looked at the 3 pins on her collar for a moment, and then looked at her face and understood immediately, with the particular intelligence of a person who has spent 40 years in power, exactly what he was dealing with. He opened, she told me, by nodding that the recent disruptions in imperial operations had been significant, and that the Empire was willing to discuss a framework for stability. She opened a document on the table screen between them. The document was a ledger. It listed, in specific and reference detail, everything she knew, every covert operation, every lane collapse, every communication between Kreth intelligence and Senate delegates, the location and purpose of every facility whose existence the Empire had never acknowledged, the full record of what had been done to General Akafer, General Tanaka, and General Al-Rashid, including the analysis that identified the method, the motive, and the chain of authorization that had approved all 3 actions. She let him read it. Then she told him something that she had prepared carefully, because she understood that the words you choose in a room like that are the architecture everything else is built on. She told him that every piece of information in that document had already been distributed, not held, not stored in a single archive. Distributed to dead-drop repositories in neutral systems, to trusted contacts in 14 civilizations, to automated relay systems with time locks that would begin transmitting their contents publicly at regular intervals, unless actively canceled by a living authorized user. She told him clearly, the only authorized user. She was not threatening to release the information. She was informing him that it was already beyond her power to stop, unless he gave her reason to stop it. He asked, she said, with the careful composure of someone controlling a very significant internal response, what she wanted. She told him. She wanted a public acknowledgement, not a whisper in a Senate corridor, not a carefully worded statement that could be interpreted 6 ways, but a clear and formal acknowledgement before the Galactic Senate that Generals Akafor, Tanaka, and al-Rashid had been deliberately and unlawfully ended by agents of the Kreth Empire. She wanted the immediate and permanent cessation of the Lane collapse operation, and the full restoration of every degraded hyperspace corridor in the Eastern Spiral Arm to its original condition within 18 months. She wanted the withdrawal of all Kreth economic leverage agreements from the 3 primary human systems at Reach, Veth, and Solon. And she wanted a permanent seat for humanity on the Galactic Security Council, the body from which we had been procedurally excluded for 30 years through the quiet machinations of exactly the kind of Senate influence that had now been publicly documented. Vethkor looked at her for a very long time. He told her, she said, that humanity did not understand power, that the Empire had existed for 1100 years, that smaller civilizations had made demands of the Kreth before, and the Empire was still here and they were not. Ira listened to all of it. Then she said, "You ended 3 women who were building a future for their people. I am only finishing what they started. The power was never mine. It was always theirs. I am the one they sent it home with." Another silence. Then Vethkor asked how long she needed to receive confirmation that the terms were being enacted before the first time lock released. She told him 72 hours for an initial Senate confirmation of intent, with full implementation benchmarks to follow on a structured timeline. She had the benchmarks prepared. She gave them to him. He read them. He said, "You prepared these before you came." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, without warmth but without hostility either, in the tone of someone making a genuine assessment, "You are a very unusual person." "No," she said, "I'm a very patient one. There is a difference." The meeting ended. I was waiting in the corridor outside. When the door opened and she came through, she looked exactly as she had when she went in, no different, no visibly relieved, no more animated than usual. She walked past me toward the shuttle dock and I fell into step beside her. "Well," I said. 72 hours, she said. "Go and get some sleep, Voss." I did not get any sleep. I sat in the shuttle bay monitoring communications for the next 18 hours until the Kreth representative to the Galactic Senate filed a formal request for an emergency closed session. The session was granted. It lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, the Senate issued a formal statement of imperial acknowledgement, a document that, for the first time in history, confirmed that the Kreth Empire had carried out deliberate and unlawful actions resulting in the deaths of 3 human generals. The galaxy did not erupt. These things rarely do. There was no parade, no fireworks, no grand moment of collective celebration. The response was more like the aftermath of a very long storm, a gradual, careful return to movement. The sense of things resuming that had been suspended. The Senate opened formal proceedings on Lane restoration within the week. Kreth economic agreements with the three human systems were quietly restructured over the following months, losing the coercive provisions that had made them leverage rather than partnership. The Security Council seat negotiation took 4 months and 3 separate committee reviews, but it was concluded, and humanity's representative took her place at the table, a young diplomat from the Outer Reach system named Clara Obi, who had trained under Adiz Aka for years before and who wore, on the day of her first session, a small diplomatic pin on her collar that I recognized. The names of the 3 generals were engraved on the hull of the Remembrance, beneath the main observation deck, in letters large enough to read from a shuttle at docking distance. Ira had asked for that. It was the only honor she requested. She turned down 3 medals, 2 formal citations, an honorary commission from the Unified Command, and an invitation to address the Galactic Senate on the subject of galactic security reform. She sent a brief note in response to that last one. It said, "I am a retired mechanic. I fixed something that was broken. The Senate should address the people who are going to maintain it." I went to find her on Kale's Drift 6 months after the meeting on the neutral station. I had taken leave, the first proper leave I had taken in 2 years, and I told myself I was going because I had official correspondence to deliver. The correspondence was real, but it was not why I went. The dock was the same, cold, functional, smelling of engine oil and old coffee. The woman at the desk recognized me and pointed me to Workshop 4 without being asked. Ira was working on a different engine this time, a newer model, but equally disassembled, with parts spread in the same organized way across the same surfaces. She looked up when I came in. "You are not here for official reasons," she said. "No," I admitted. "Coffee is on," she said. "It is still not good." I got 2 cups and sat on the same stool, and she sat on hers, and we drank for a moment in the quiet of the workshop. Outside, through the small porthole above the workbench, the dim gas giant filled half the sky, banded and slow, turning in its enormous silence. "The Security Council session went well," I said. "I know. Clara Obi sent me a message. She is doing exactly what Akafor would have wanted. The lane restoration is ahead of schedule. Also not surprising, the Kreth are efficient when they have no choice." I held my cup in both hands and looked at the engine and thought about how to say the thing I had actually come to say. I had been thinking about it for 6 months. I had written drafts of it in my head on slow nights aboard the Harrow, and none of them had quite been right. And sitting here now in this cold workshop with the bad coffee, I still was not sure I had the words. "I have been thinking," I said, "about the generals." Ira turned slightly toward me, just enough to show she was listening. "They built all of it," I said. "The network, the intelligence, the diplomatic map, the tactical models. They built 4 years of careful work, and they never saw it used. And then you came and used it, and the Kreth backed down, and the Senate acknowledged what happened, and the council seat is confirmed. And the 3 of them, they never got to see any of it." The workshop was very quiet. "No," said Ira, "they did not." "Does that seem right to you?" I said. "It came out smaller than I intended. Does it seem fair?" She looked at the gas giant through the porthole for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was the same as always, measured and direct, without performance. But there was something underneath it that I had not heard before. "Akafor understood that she was building something she might not finish," she said. "Tanaka understood it. Al-Rashid especially understood it. She was the one who built the recovery paths, the hidden keys, the distributed storage. She knew she must have known that there was a chance the work would outlast the workers. She built it to survive anyway." She was quiet for a moment. "That is not something a person does by accident. That is a choice. A conscious choice made with clear eyes." She set down her cup. "They were not naive about what they were doing or what it might cost," she said. "They were patient. Patience is not passive, Voss. It is not giving up or accepting defeat or waiting for someone else to act. Patience is deciding that the work is worth doing even when you cannot be certain you will be there for the end of it. Akafar, Tanaka, Al-Rashid, they made that decision every day for 4 years. She looked at me. The work got done, she said. That was what they wanted, not the credit, not the ceremony, the work, and the work got done. I thought about Clara Obi sitting in the Security Council with a borrowed pin on her collar. I thought about the lanes being restored, and the 12 smaller civilizations that used them to run their economies, and the fact that not one of those civilizations knew a woman named Al-Rashid had spent 4 years building the intelligence framework that made it possible. I thought about the 11,000 people who had left their colony without knowing exactly why, and had come back to find it quiet and the threatening fleet gone, and had simply resumed their lives. Sometimes the most important things that happen are the ones nobody can fully explain. Are you afraid of the Kreth? I asked. Of what they might do next? They are still the largest empire in the Eastern Arm. This did not end them. No, she agreed. It did not end them. It reminded them that they are not invisible, and it established that there are consequences for certain choices. That is sufficient for now. She picked up her hand tool and turned back to the engine. Power is not permanent, Voss. It has to be maintained. It has to be chosen over and over by the people willing to do the work. The Kreth forgot that other people make choices too. She fitted a component into place with a sound of clean precision. 3 women with patience and clear eyes and 4 years of careful, invisible work, she said quietly. The Empire had 1,000 ships and 100 years of plans, and 3 women with clear eyes figured it out and built the answer and left it behind for someone to find. She did not say anything else for a while. Neither did I. The gas giant turned slowly outside the porthole. Somewhere in the station, a conveyor was running and pipes were working, and the ordinary machinery of life was doing its quiet, necessary work. When I left Kale's Drift an hour later and walked back through the cold corridors to the shuttle dock, I passed a young freight coordinator arguing good-naturedly with the dock manager over a loading schedule, and 2 engineers sharing a meal at a corner table, and a child running ahead of her father toward the viewing window where the stars were bright and still and enormously far away. I stopped and looked at them for a moment. The child pressed her hands against the glass and looked out at the dark between the stars with the pure and uncomplicated interest of someone for whom the universe is still mostly a question they have not yet started to answer. The lanes were open. The council seat was filled. The generals had names on a hull that would carry them into whatever came next. The Baba Yaga does not haunt the wood because she is lost. She haunts it because it is hers. And for the first time in a long time, the stars felt like ours again.